Masechet Zevaḥim Daf Dalid. The Mishnah mentioned the requirement that one who slaughters an animal as a korban has to have in mind what type of korban it is. L'shem olah, l'shem shelamim. If he has in mind the wrong korban, then certainly it will not fulfill the obligation of the owner, and depending on what type of korban it is, it may be completely unfit to even continue further offering that animal. Now we're going to ask for a source. How do you know that when you do zebicha, the slaughtering of the animal, that it has to be lishma, for the sake of that particular type of korban? What we're going to do is we're going to prove it first for shechita, and then we're going to go on and prove it also for the other of the other three services. There are four essential services that one must do for a korban, and that is the slaughtering of it, zevicha, and then kabbalat hadam, you have to receive the blood into a holy vessel, and then carry that blood to the mizbech, that's holacha, and then zerika is sprinkling it on the mizbech. So we're going to prove it for each one of the four services. So the first one, Damar Kera, Vim Zevach Shelamim Korbano Shetehe Zebicha Leshem Shelamim. The pasuk says, if the sacrifice is a Shelamim Korbano, so we see that Zevach Shelamim, when you do Zevicha, when you're doing the slaughtering, it has to be for the sake of a Shelamim, if it is in fact for a Shelamim. Right now we're going to prove all four services for a shelamim. On Amud Bet, we'll discuss other categories of sacrifices. Okay, now we ask about this derivation. Wait a second, maybe Zevach Shelamim is the name of it. Vim Zevach Shelamim Korbano. If one's korban, this is in Vayikra chapter 3, when it's going through the different categories, and Olah and Shelamim is going to the different types of korbanot and telling you the laws. So maybe this is called Zevach Shelamim, not that if you're doing Zevicha, then it should be for Shelamim. So how do you know that you can read it that way? And the answer is Medichtib hamakrib et dam hashelamim, hazorek et dam hashelamim, vela ketib zebach, vahacha ketib zebach, shema'mina sheteh zebicha l'shem shelamim. And the answer is that we see in Parashat Tzav, when it reviews the laws of this very korban, it doesn't call it Zebach Shelamim, it just says the one who offers the blood of the Shelamim, or someone who sprinkles the blood of the Shelamim, and it doesn't say Zebach Shelamim. So we see that the name of it is not Zebach Shelamim, it's called Shelamim. And here it has the extra word zevach, and that comes to teach us that the zevicha, the slaughtering of the korban, has to be for the sake of being a shelamim. Good. Ashkechan zevicha, right? One down, three to go. Shar avodot minelan. How do we know the other services have to also be l'shem, that kind of korban? And maybe you'll say we can learn it from zevicha. If the slaughtering has to be l'shem, so then we can derive, that'll be the paradigm, and we'll derive from the other ones that they also have to be l'shem shelamim. Ma lezebicha sheken nifsela shelo l'shem ochalin bepesach. No, but we see that there is a particular stringency regarding the slaughtering, which is that if someone slaughters a korban pesach for the sake of the owners, but let's say the owner cannot eat because the owner is elderly and doesn't have teeth and is not able to eat. And so one slaughters it on behalf of the owner, but shelo l'shem ochlin, for the sake of someone who cannot eat, then it's no good. This stringency is only a stringency regarding the slaughtering. So I might have thought, since slaughtering has this stringency, maybe it also has a stringency that has to be l'shem, the certain korban. But maybe it's not true for the others. So therefore, this one cannot be a paradigm for the others. I need another derivation. El amar kera, hamakriv et dam hashelamim, shetehe kabbalah l'shem shelamim. Rather, we will learn it from a pasuk in Sav that says, one who sacrifices the blood of the shelamim. And so even though it says makriv, sacrifices, we are interpreting that to mean kabbalah, receiving it, an essential part of the sacrificial process, and so that has to be for the sake of shelamim. We ask, since we have a source for Kabbalah, So why not have just this pasuk, and I'll use this as a paradigm to learn for other things as well? And the answer is no, I can't do that. Mishum de'ikat lemifrach ma lekabbalah sheken pesula bezar ve'isha. Kabbalah, the receiving of the blood, has a stringency in that someone who is a non-kohen or a woman, generally women are also non-kohanim, but maybe you would have thought that a bat kohen perhaps could do it. So anyway, a non-kohen cannot do the Kabbalah. A non-kohen can do shechita. Even the owner himself can do the shechita if he wants. So therefore, Kabbalah has a stringency. I might have thought just like Kabbalah has to be done by a kohen only, so that one has to be only l'shem the shelamim, but these shechita maybe does not have to be. So therefore, I need a derivation for this as well. Ashkechan shechita ve'Kabbalah. 2 down. 2 to go. Zirika minayin. We're skipping holacha for a minute. We're going to the last one of sprinkling the blood. How do I know that that has to be lishem korban? So if you say, well, why not learn from both of these two together? What stringency do they both have? No, these two, the shechita and the Kabbalah, both have to be done in the northern part of the courtyard for some korbanot, whereas the zirika, you don't have to sprinkle the blood while you're standing in the north, far away, and sprinkle it all the way to the mizbeach. It actually is not a very good idea to do it that far. You go right up to the mizbeach and you sprinkle it there. Whereas the shechita and the Kabbalah have to be in the safon, so that's a stringency. So maybe because it has that stringency, that's why it has to be l'shem, but the zirika that doesn't have the stringency in the north doesn't. And furthermore, there are some types of korbanot that are not, there is no sprinkling on the mizbeach, and that's the korban hatat that is sprinkled on the inside, like the one on Yom Kippur. It's only sprinkled on the inside, not the one on the outside. So therefore, you couldn't possibly learn, since there are many korbanot that have only the shechita and Kabbalah, but do not have a zirika at all, so I cannot learn something that is more widespread, and therefore more stringent, maybe that's why it has to be l'shem, to this that is not as widespread, it doesn't even apply to all korbanot. So therefore, I need my own derivation for zirika. Ela amar kera hazorek et dam hashelamim sheteh zirika l'shem shelamim. Someone who sprinkles, it could have just said damo, because we're in the paragraph that's talking about shelamim, so you don't have to repeat hazorek et dam hashelamim. So why repeat shelamim? It's an extra word to teach me here that the sprinkling has to be for the sake of a shelamim. V'lichtov rachamana bezirika v'lelaf mina. Now we ask, why doesn't Torah only teach us about zorek, and let that be a paradigm that all the others have to also be leshem this korban mishum deika lemifrach ma lezirika sheken hayav aleha zar mita. No, zirika has a stringency because if a non-kohen does zirika, he will be liable to mita bidei shamayim. Although a non-kohen is not allowed to do Kabbalah or holacha either, but if he does it, will not get this punishment of mita bidei shamayim. So I might think that because this one has the stringency of this type of punishment, that's why it has to be l'shem, but the other ones don't have to be l'shem. So that's why you need all these derivations. Ashkechan kulhu holacha minalan. 3 down, 1 to go. How do I know that the carrying of the blood from the place of the slaughter to the mizbeach, that has to be done l'shem this korban? Well, if you say, why not learn from all 3 together to this one, and I don't need a special verse? But those 3 are indispensable. You can't do without them. I mean, you couldn't possibly have a korban if you don't slaughter it, and you wouldn't have blood to sprinkle if you don't gather it, and you have to sprinkle the blood in whatever way is required by that type of korban. But the holacha you wouldn't need to do if you slaughtered the animal near the mizbeach, or you just sprinkled it from far. So then you don't actually have to do holacha in order to accomplish what you need to accomplish. So I might think that holacha is optional, and therefore it doesn't have to be l'shem korban. That's why I need a pasuk for this too. Ela amar kera v'hikrib et hakol hamizbecha v'amar mor zo halachat ebarim lakebesh. The pasuk back in Vayikra says that the Kohen will sacrifice. Again, it says the word v'hikrib, but we are learning that this means the carrying of the limbs and the limbs, this is of a korban olah, to the ramp of the mizbeach, and so that's referring to halacha, even though it uses the word just vihikrib. V'tanya vihikribu zo kabbalat adam. Now we have a braita that the word vihikribu elsewhere in this chapter is referring to receiving the dam. So this is interesting. The word vihikrib and vihikribu is referring to both Kabbalah and halacha. Why is the Torah using the same word for both? The Torah purposely uses the same word to refer to halacha as Kabbalah in order to teach that halacha should not be separated from the way that you do Kabbalah. Just like receiving the blood has to be Leshem, this Korban, so too the carrying has to be Leshem, this Korban. V'ashkechan shinui kodesh, shinui ba'alim minelan. Now that we found a source that for all four avodot, they have to be for the sake of a certain type of kodesh, a certain type of korban. And if I have shinui, if I'm not allowed to change, deviate from the type of korban it is. So I found sources for that. But now, next stage, what about shinui be'alim? How do you know that I'm not allowed to switch the owner? If there's something was brought by Reuven, so I'm not allowed to have in mind during the shechita or any of the avodot, that this is for the sake of Shimon. No, it won't fulfill his obligation if you change the owner from Reuven to Shimon. What's the source? Amar Pinchas bered Rav Ameh, Amar Kera, ubsar zebach todat shelamav, sheteh zebicha l'shem todah, imeno inyan l'shinui kodesh, tenaf kalan mehatam, tenehu inyan l'shinui be'alim. Rav Pinchas, the son of Rav Ameh, says, the pasuk in Parashat Tzav is talking about a korban todah, and is teaching that it has to be eaten on that day. You have just that day and that night, but it cannot be eaten the next day. And it says besad zevach todat shelamav. There's a lot of words here. We're going to learn a lot of things from this. So besad, the flesh of zebach, of the slaughter of todah. Well, it is a korban todah. It also calls it shelamav. It's the todah of shelamav. So there is a close relationship between a korban todah and it basically is a type of korban shelamim. And so we can learn from here that since it says zevach, todah, that the zevicha, the slaughtering, has to be for the sake of a todah. Now, I already know that the slaughtering has to be for the sake of this type of kodesh. Imeno inyan l'shinui kodesh. So since I don't need it for that, so I can take it out of context, tenaf kalan mehatam, because I already learned it above from the pasuk regarding shelamim. Teneo inyan l'shinui be'alim. I can apply it to a different category, and so I will apply it to the fact that I cannot switch the owner. This is one of the midot she'atzrain deshet bahem im eno inyan. If something is superfluous to teach me one thing, because I already know it, then I can apply it to something else. So that's how I know that shechita has to be for the sake of the owner. Hold on, this pasuk is coming to teach me shinui be'alim. Don't I need the same pasuk for something else, as is taught in the Braita? Ubesad zebach todah shelamav. Abba Hanin omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer ba lelamed todah sheshechata l'shem shelamim keshera, shelamim sheshechatan l'shem todah pesula. Ma hefresh ben zeh lazeh? Todah kiruya shelamim ven shelamim kiruya todah. Abba Hanin says, name Rabbi Eliezer, that this pasuk comes to teach that if I have a korban todah and I did shechita for the sake of a shelamim, that's okay, because a todah is a subtype of a shelamim. But if I have a shelamim and I offer it l'shem todah, then it's no good. Why? What's the difference between this case and that case? Because a todah is called shelamim, it's a subcase of shelamim, so I just gave the more general category. That's okay. But a shilamim is if it's just a regular shilamim, that's the broader category. It's not a todah. A todah is only one particular type, and this thing is not. If it's not a todah, so then that's wrong, and that will not be good. Now, how do I know that? Because it says todat shilamav. So I already need this pasuk for another law, and the answer is anan mi zevach ka'amdinan. Yeah, I know that law from todat shilamav. But the law that we said before, shinui ba'alim, is from the word zebach. That it says the zevach, the shechita of this will be for a korban todah. Wait, I need this pasuk to teach me yet another law. How do I know that a korban hatat and a korban asham also have to be eaten that day and night, and I cannot leave any left over till the next day? Oh, from the word zebach in this pasuk, because it says besad zebach, so that's referring to chatat and asham, and todah shilamim, that's a korban todah, and then the rest of the pasuk says you have to eat that day and that night and don't leave any left over. So I need the word zebach to teach me the law about when I can eat a chatat and asham. Imken nichtob kera ubsar todah shalamav zevach. My zevach shema'aminat tarte. So if it wanted to only teach me with the chatat and asham have to be in that day, then you could have put zevach at the end of the pasuk, besar todat shalamav, and also zevach you have to be that day. Why is it put zevach beforehand? From the placement of zevach, I can learn about chatat and asham, and I can also learn about the law of shinui ba'alim. Ashkechan zevicha. Now I have a source that the slaughtering has to be for the sake of this owner. Shad avodot minelan. How do I know that that's true also for the Kabbalah holacha zerika? V'chitema le'laf mizevicha. Maybe you'll say, I'll learn it from zevicha. That'll be a paradigm. No good. Ma lezevicha sheken poseh shelo l'shem ochlin bePesach. We saw above already that shechita has a special stringency that regarding Korban Pesach, if I have in mind this is a Korban Pesach, and I have in mind this is for the Baalim, but the Baal happens to be someone who cannot eat, then the Shechita is no good. The Korban is no good. That's a special stringency regarding the Shechita. That does not apply. If I do the Holacha, if for the sake of someone who cannot eat, that's okay. So since there's a special stringency here regarding the Shechita, I cannot use Shechita as a paradigm for everything else. Nemra zebicha b'shinui kodesh, v'nemra zebicha b'shinui be'alim. Ma zebicha mora b'shinui kodesh, lo halakta ben zebicha l'shar avodot, af zebicha mora b'shinui be'alim, lo techalek bahen ben zebicha l'shar avodot. So the answer is, it says zebicha regarding the fact that it has to be l'shem, a type of korban, and I can't deviate from that. And it also says zebicha, we learned that the slaughtering has to also be for the sake of this owner, and I can't change. So just like when we learned the law that the slaughtering has to be for the sake of this type of korban, and over there we already proved we made no distinction between slaughtering and the other three avodot, so too the slaughtering that we have a derivation for regarding changing the owner, that you're not allowed to change the owner, we also will not make any distinction between the slaughtering and the other avodot. So therefore, basically by analogy, once we learned all four avodot for shinui zebach, shinui kodesh, therefore, once I have just one derivation for shinui ba'alim, I can by analogy learn that all four have to be l'shem ba'alim. But now the Gemara challenges this comparison on 4 counts. Ika lemifrach, we can refute this comparison. Number 1, ma leshinui kodesh sheken pesula begufa. If one deviates regarding the type of korban it is, that is more substantial because it's a disqualification in the sacrifice itself. What type of sacrifice it is. It's definitional. Whereas a change in the owner, that's a secondary matter of who the owner is. It's less attached to the korban itself. Number 2, V'yeshno be'arba avodot. The change in the type of sacrifice, that will apply to all 4 avodot equally. That's what we started the sugya with, proving that for all 4 avodot, you have to have in mind this is a shelamim. However, when it comes to the owner, actually the main point of having the wrong owner would affect the zedikah. If during the zedikah you think of a different owner, that's what's going to disqualify it. Now, the first three, it also plays a part. That's what we're actually trying to prove right now. But it plays a part in a more indirect way. If one is doing the slaughtering and saying, I'm slaughtering this for the sake of Shimon, but really supposed to be for the Reuven, that's not a problem. The problem is if I slaughter it, while I'm slaughtering it, I say I'm slaughtering it so that when I do the zedikah, it will be for Shimon. Then it makes it no good. So it does apply to the slaughtering, and the same thing for the Kabbalah and Holacha. If I do Kabbalah or Holacha, we're having in mind that when I do the zedikah before Shimon, then it disqualifies it. So in that sense, that's the law that we're trying to prove. However, if I directly say I'm doing the Kabbalah for the sake of Shimon, that's not a problem. And so that is another difference between them, that regarding the type of Korban, that directly applies to all four services, whereas the owner applies most directly to the zedikah, and the other ones only if I'm thinking of the other three, that I'm going to do the zedikah for the wrong person. So that's a second difference. And the third difference, v'yeshno la'achar mita, v'yeshno b'sibor kebeyachid, that having the wrong item in mind, the wrong type of korban, that will apply even after the owner dies. If an owner had to bring a korban olah, he dies, then the heirs will bring the korban olah also. If the kohanim have in mind anything that's going to be not for an olah, for a shilamim, that's going to be a problem because this still has to be an olah. However, if they have in mind for a different owner, there's no problem with that because the owner died anyway. So there is no owner. That owner is not relevant, and so that's another difference between them. And furthermore, the law of Shinui Kodesh applies to a Korban Sibur and a Korban Yachid. Korban Sibur, sometimes the Korban Sibur has to bring a Chatat offering or an Olah offering, and they're also, the Kohanim have to have in mind that it's the right type of Korban. But there, the law of owner does not apply because it's owned by everybody. And so, for four reasons, we cannot derive the laws of Shinui Ba'alim from Shinui Kodesh. Now we're going to answer two of them. Vaf al gav de tarte lav davka, tarte miha davka. Even though two of them are not so precise, we could answer them, but the other two are precise. In what way did you say that a change in the owner is not a disqualification in the offering itself? Why did you say that? Machshava be'alma, because it's only a thought of, I thought of Shimon instead of Reuven. Yeah, but Shinui Kodesh Name Machshava Ba'amahu. Thinking of a different type of sacrifice, Shalamim instead of an Olah, is also just a thought. So therefore, it's not any more inherent. It's not like a blemish in the animal itself. They're both just thoughts that one has. Rather, really, this is the same, that just like a wrong thought would make it bad if I think of the wrong type of korban, so too, thinking of the wrong owner when I'm going to do zedikah also will make it no good. So actually that makes sense, and so we could disregard that challenge. Urav Pinchas bered Rav Mari damar yesh shinui ba'alim lachar mita tarte miha ika lemifrach. And the second one we can answer if we follow the opinion of Rav Pinchas, the son of Rav Mari, who says that there is a problem of switching owners even after death, even though the owner died. But still, when we do the korban, we have to have in mind that this is on behalf of this Reuven who died. And so that was also going to be the same. It applies to those alive and dead. But the other two items will apply to both. And therefore, we still have a question. How can we derive all the other avadot besides slaughtering? How do we know that it's a problem if it's for the sake of the wrong owner? Ela amar Rav Asher amar kerav v'nirsa lo lechaper alav velo al chavero. Rather, Rav Asher says we can learn that sprinkling the blood for the sake of a different owner, that will be a problem. We can learn it from this pasuk that says that this korban will be accepted as for him as to atone for him. Since it says lechaper alav, to atone for him, that means for him only and not for someone else. If you had in mind someone else, then it will not atone. It will not fulfill its obligation. Wait a second. Is this pasuk coming to teach us that you have to have l'shem be'alim for zirika? We need it for something else. V'nirsa lo lechaper alav. Rabbi Shimon omer et she'alav haya b'achariyuto ve'et she'eno alav eno haya b'achariyuto. This baraita learns from this pasuk that it will be acceptable to him to atone for him. Alav. Rabbi Shimon learns from here that if he has an obligation upon himself as a neder, he took a personal obligation, I am going to bring a korban, then he is responsible for it. And even if this animal that he designated gets lost, he has to bring another one. Whereas if he did not take it as a neder, but rather as a nedava, where he said, this animal will be a korban, but he didn't take it upon himself as his personal obligation, then he is not responsible for it if it dies or gets lost. And that's what we learn from lechaper alav, that he has an obligation. We back that up with Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi, my ta'ama kevan amar alai keman da ta'un le kitfe dameh. So Rav Yitzchak bar Avdimi explains, so how do we learn it from here? Because once a person takes it upon himself, alav, when he says hare alai korban, so then it's like he's putting it upon his shoulders. It's a personal obligation, and even if the animal dies, he has to bring another one. But if it doesn't say alai, he just says hare ze korban, then it's not a personal obligation. So we need this pasuk to teach us that law. So we can't. How can we use it for Rav Asher's law? And he answers, Rav Asher me v'nirsa lo lechaper ka'amar. Rav Asher is not learning from the word alav, but rather from the word lo. V'nirsa lo will be acceptable for him. That has to be only for him, and the kohen cannot have in mind a different person while he is doing zirika. Okay, good. Now we got 2 out of 4. Ashkechan zebicha u zirika. Now we know that the first, the slaughtering, and the last thing, the sprinkling, have to be done for the sake of the owner. Kabbalah minalan. What about the accepting the blood? V'chi tema le'laf mezebicha u zirika. Say, we can use these two as a paradigm. Ma lezebicha u zirika sheken avodah shechayvin aleha bachutz. But you can't learn it because there's a stringency regarding the slaughtering and the sprinkling that one is liable if one does it outside the Bet HaMikdash. You're not allowed to slaughter a sacrificial animal outside the Mikdash, and you also cannot take the blood and sprinkle it on an altar that's outside the Mikdash. Whereas the Kabbalah, receiving the blood, if one would do that outside the Mikdash, there is no prohibition in that. So therefore, these have a stringency, and therefore we cannot learn the law that there has to be l'shem ba'alim from there to Kabbalah, which is less stringent. Ela Rav Asher atya me'el nazir dichtib ve'ta'ayil ya'aseh zebach shelamim shetehasiyato l'shem shelamim v'imeno inyan l'shinui kodesh denafkale mehatam teneo inyan l'shinui ba'alim. Rav Asher says, I'm going to learn Kabbalah from the ayil that the nazir has to bring. When a nazir is finished with his days of nizirut, he brings a ram, and it says regarding that ha'ayil ya'aseh, he will do this, prepare it. So we're taking this to refer to Kabbalah as a zebach shelamim. Now, this seems to mean that you have to make sure you know it's a shelamim. You have to know what type of korban it is. But I don't need another derivation to tell me that it has to be l'shem shelamim, because we already derived that in the beginning from Pesukim that we brought at the beginning of this sugya. So we'd use im eno inyan. If it's not teaching us shinui kodesh, because we already learned that from other Pesukim about shelamim, then we can apply it to shinui be'alim. So now we know Kabbalah also. Amar leRav Acha bar Abba leRava ema ya'aseh kelal zebach perat kelal uprat en kelal ela ma shebaperat zibichain midi acharina la. Rav Acha bar Abba tells Rava, wait a second, this pasuk that Rav Asher brought, you can read it differently. You can read it as a kelal uprat. You see the word etayil ya'aseh. Ya'aseh, that's a generality. You should generally make it. But zevach is only only one type is referring to the shechita. Ya'aseh is referring to all things that you do. Zebach is referring just to the slaughtering. So this is a kelal uperat, and whenever you have a generality followed by a detail, then you say that we do not include anything from the generality, but only what is in the detail. And according to that, slaughter, yes, would have to be for the sake of shelamim, but nothing else would have to be for the sake of shelamim. So we actually learn the opposite thing, that only the zebicha, only shechita, and not anything else. The Gemara answers, if the pasuk read Ya'aseh Shelamim, then I would say yes, that is in fact a kalal. Everything should be made for a Shelamim. And then in particular Zebach, then I would say that's a kalal uperat. And I would agree with you. But the pasuk doesn't say that word order. Hashta dichtib Ya'aseh Zebach Shelamim havele kalal she'eno maleh v'chol kalal she'eno maleh en danin oto bichlal ufrat. But since the word Zebach interrupts between Ya'aseh and Shelamim, so then the generality, is Ya'aseh Shelamim, but the generality is not complete because Zevach interrupts, and any generality that is not complete, we do not treat it as a kalal uperat. So therefore, there's no problem, and we're going to revive Rav Asher's proof. Ravina amar leolam danin vela Hashem hazar vekalal. Ravina says, actually, even if the generality is not complete like it is here, we can still consider that a kalal, and the zevach will be the perat. But the next word is la Hashem, which is more of another generality, that anything you do for Hashem, and therefore this is a kalal uperat ukalal, which works differently, as we will see. Amar le Rav Acha medifti l'Ravina v'hala dame kelala kama lechelala batra. Kelala kama marbe asiyot v'tula. Kelala batra kol laHashem b'afilu shevichat shirayim v'haktarat emurin. But Rav Acha medifti tells Ravina, this is not a kelal upratu kelal, because the first kelal is not the same as the last kelal. They have to be equivalent to each other. The first kelal is going to include all the asiyot, any avodah, an official avodah, but nothing more. Whereas the last one that says La Hashem, that's going to include anything that you do La Hashem, even if it's not one of the 4 official avodot, and that will include even pouring the extra blood, leftover blood, onto the base of the mizbeach, or burning of the innards, the sacrificial portions on the mizbeach, which are not officially part of the 4 avodot, but are things that you do la Hashem. So since they're not equivalent, you cannot say it's a kalal upratu kalal. But we answer that in fact the school of Rabbi Ishmael did apply kalal upratu kalal, even if they didn't match just like this. Therefore, it is a klal upratu klal, and here's the rule: klal upratu klal iyatadan ela ke'ain haperat. We always are going to look at the detail, and give things that are generally like the detail. It's not only the detail, but something that has the same characteristics as that detail in some important way. Ma perat meforash avodah bainan lishman afkol avodah bainan lishma. The detail is something that is one of the 4 avodot and has to be for the sake of the owner. So too, all 4, anything that is an avodah, all 4 have to be for the sake of the owner. So here we go. We have a proof now for everything. Ima perat meforash avodah v'chaybin aleha bachutz. Av kol avodah v'chaybin aleha bachutz shechita uzrikain kabbalah holachala. But we can object to this kalal upratu kalal because the perat has something else, another factor, that it is a type of avodah that you're not allowed to do outside. So maybe only avodot that you're not allowed to do outside. That's true for shechita and zirika, but it's not true for kabbalah and holacha. You're not liable if you do those outside of the temple courtyard. So actually from this kalal upratu klal, if we accept this logic, it would apply only to shechita and zirika. Iname ma perat meforash dabar ta'un safon veyeshno b'chataot upapinimiyot af kol ta'un safon veyeshno b'chataot apinimiyot shechita v'kabbala'in zirikala. Or another way to interpret this klal upratu klal is that just as the perat, which is the zebicha, the shechita, is something that has to be done in the north for many korbanot, has to be done in the northern part of the courtyard, and also there is a law of shechita in all korbanot, including korban hatat that is sprinkled only in the inside, whereas those that are sprinkled inside don't have a zirika on the main mizbeach. So therefore, I'm going to include only those other avodot that that are done sometimes in the north, and that also are included in the include the category of chatot pinimiyot, which would not be zerika. So that would be shechitan kabbala'in. Yes, I would include those, but I would exclude zerika. And then also, I would not be able to learn all of them. So there's many ways to interpret this klal upratu klal, depending on which aspects of shechita one is going to focus on to generalize. So how are we going to learn everything? And the answer is like this. These various interpretations are all equal. There's no way to decide that one is better than the other, and therefore we're going to bring both of them. And by bringing both of them, we will in fact learn all the avodot. Or another same idea in different language. Lishna acharina, chada avchada, teku bemilita. There's one, and therefore we leave them standing in their status, and we accept them both. Or we can accept the second version, and that way we have a derivation for shechita and Kabbalah. We only don't have one for zirika, but that we can use Rav Asher earlier, who said v'nirsa lo, that it will be acceptable for him, and we learn from there that zirika has to be for the sake of the owner, and that way we can derive that everything has to be for the sake of the owner, at least regarding El Nazir. Ashkechan El Nazir. That's the pasuk that this klal uprat uklal was talking about. El Nazir. Shar shelamim min elan. What about other shelamim? V'chitem anelef me El Nazir. Ma'al El Nazir sheken yesh imahen damim acherim. And if you say, let's use El Nazir as a paradigm, you can't use it as a paradigm because the Nazir has to bring also other korbanot. And so maybe that's why, because it has to bring other korbanot. That's a special law, stringent, that it has to be l'shem ba'alim. But other shelamim maybe not. Im ken ichtov shelamav, my shelamim, lerabot kol shelamim. No, if so, then it would say shelamav, his offerings, but it doesn't say his offerings. It says the more expansive shelamim, all offerings, and that comes to include, in fact, all offerings have to be, all shelamim offerings have to be l'shem ba'alim. What we have so far is we started off the sugya proving that for a korban shelamim, it has to be for the sake of that type of offering. And then we proved just now that also for the El Nazir and for Shelamim in general, that it has to be L'Shem Be'alim. Good. Ashkechan Shelamim. Now we know regarding Shelamim that it has to be for the sake of this type of Korban and has to be for the sake of these owners. Shar kol kodashim min elan. What about every other type of Korban? V'chi tema nelef b'Shelamim ma'lishlamim sheken te'onin semicha unsachim utnufat chazeh v'shok. And if you say, let's use Shelamim as a paradigm and learn all the other types of sacrifice from it, you cannot, because Shelamim has a special law that the owners have to do semicha. It also has to be accompanied by libations, and you have to take the parts of the breast and the hind leg and wave them. The owner and the priest hold them together, and they wave them up and down in all directions. And these things are all not all true for other korbanot. So maybe only Shelamim that has these stringencies has to be l'shem this korban and l'shem be'alim, but maybe not others. אמר כרזות התורה לעולה ולמנחה ולחטאת ולאשם ולמילואים ולזבח השלמים. היא קישן הכתוב לשלמים. מה שלמים בין שינוי קודש בין שינוי בעלים בעינן לשמה? אף כל בין שינוי קודש בין שינוי בעלים בעינן לשמה. Rather, the pasuk says, this is the law of the burnt offering, the meal offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, the consecration offering, and the offering of the and the sacrifice of the peace offering. You see, all types of korban are connected to and compared to a shelamim. So just like shelamim, it's a problem if you change the type of animal or you have in mind a different ba'alim, has to be lishma. So too regarding all animals, do not make it into a different animal, have in mind a different ba'al. Rather, it has to be, they all have to be lishma. Now we have one last question. Now that you've proven that regarding all the avadot, for all korbanot, we learn from Zot HaTorah that they're all the same, that has to be l'shem, a type of korban, and l'shem be'alim. Why don't we say that if you did shechita, not lishma, that it should be a disqualified korban altogether. Our Mishnah taught that that's only true for a korban chatat and korban pesach, but for all other korbanot, although it does not fulfill the obligation for the owner, but the korban is still valid, and you can continue to sacrifice it according to what it was designated as. Why? We just saw Pesukim that say it has to be Leshem Be'alim, Leshem this type of korban. Otherwise, it's no good. So why don't we say it's no good altogether? Amar Keram Osa Sevata Tishmor Vasita Kasher Nadata Vegomer Hay Nedaba Neder Hu Elaim Kemash Nadata Asita Yeh Neder Vimlav Yeh Nedaba. We learn from this pasuk that we already cited that says, according to that which has gone out of your lips, you shall observe to do according to what you have vowed. And the next pasuk is Nedava. So what is it? It says Kasher Nadarta. This is a neder. How come the next word says Nedava? This is a neder. Rather, if you followed all the rules as you're supposed to, then it will fulfill your neder, the one that you took upon yourself, your personal obligation. And the same is true for any korban that you are liable to bring. If you do it properly, it fulfills your obligation. But if you do not do it properly, and you do it l'shem, a different sacrifice, or for the l'shem be'alim, the wrong the owners, then it will be a nedava. A nedava, a voluntary offering, is a valid offering. You can do the whole service, just that it will not fulfill the obligation. So that's how we know that there's this in-between status where it does not fulfill the obligation, but it is still a valid sacrifice. I need both this pasuk and this pasuk here. If I only had the pasuk regarding Mosa, I would have thought, well, I don't know, what are the requirements? What do I need, am I supposed to have in mind? And what would be problematic if I have the wrong intention? What kinds of intentions do I have to have? So therefore I need Zot HaTorah to teach me that all the korbanot are equal in that they require L'Shem Be'alim and L'Shem the Korban. If I only had the pasuk Zot HaTorah, I would think that if you have a problematic intention, then it's going to be an invalid sacrifice altogether. That's why it says Mosa Sefatecha. If you do it completely properly, then it will fulfill the obligation. If you're not, for most korbanot, we saw there are exceptions, but for most korbanot, it will be a valid sacrifice, just that it will not fulfill the obligation of the owner. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.